might be a religious scientist if your dog is named Ernest Holmes.
You might be a religious scientist if you own white linen pants.
You might be a religious scientist if you have your own favorite word to use instead of using the word God.
You might be a religious scientist if you believe in both science and religion and recognize they're both talking about the same thing. You might be a religious scientist if you keep talking about the shift that is happening in the world.
You might be a religious scientist if you think Jesus was a cool dude.
You might be a religious scientist if you know that God is not a he.
You might be a religious scientist if you also know that God is not a she. You might be a religious scientist if you know that no matter what we use to describe it, referring to God or spirit or whatever word we choose is never going to be adequate.
You might be a religious scientist if you still celebrate Christmas, but you're not sure why.
You might be a religious scientist if you wear mala beads everywhere you go.
You might be a religious scientist if you drive over an hour to get to your closest center for spiritual living.
You might be a religious scientist if you believe that the Bible was not meant to be taken literally.
You might be a religious scientist if you've learned to let go and have discovered an easier way of being.
You might be a religious scientist if you know that there's magic in letting go, but then have no idea how to do that.
You might be a religious scientist if you have ever struggled to tell your friends what it is that you believe.
You might be a religious scientist if you've done a lot of work to drop your baggage around the word God.
You might be a religious scientist if people think you're in a cult.
You might be a religious scientist if scientific discoveries support your beliefs and doesn't dispute them.
You might be a religious scientist if the Sundays in January equate to the first 4 chapters of the Science of Mind textbook.
You might be a religious scientist if you know that everything is ultimately happening for you, not to you.